our subconscious mind has an innate ability to either help us move forward or actually keep us tremendously stuck. And there's so many things that even as we're in 2025, we don't understand about the human brain, things we are learning, things that we're trying to understand, and most importantly, even things we are trying to unlearn, which I'm super excited to have Todd Goodwin here today, Goodwin Hypnosis, and to talk about the power and the effect of the subconscious and the role that it plays in our day-to-day journey, especially after trauma. Todd, my friend, how are you today?
Thank you, Michael. I appreciate it, and I'm glad to be here. And hopefully we have a conversation that inspires your listeners.
Yeah, I hope so too. Now, I've had a couple people who have been experts in hypnosis over 8 years of this show. So I think we can just jump to, this isn't turning you into a chicken. We don't need to walk down that whole spiel. What I want to do is jump right into this, right? Because our subconscious is kind of like the tip of the iceberg, right? It's the real place in which, if you look at, most of our root causes of our problems exist. So I guess the first question is, what do people not understand about the subconscious?
I think what I would say, just to slightly adjust something that you said, is I believe our conscious mind is the tip of the iceberg. The conscious mind controls a very small percentage of what we do every day, mostly willpower, logic, analysis, problem solving, like that. And the subconscious is the vast amount of ice in the iceberg that's beneath the surface. So here's an interesting way of thinking about it. The Titanic saw the tip of the iceberg, but it was the iceberg beneath the surface that sank the ship. And that's kind of how it is with most people, with most of us. We all have tendencies that are driven by the subconscious, which is the irrational and emotional part of us that controls most of what we do. And for better or for worse, the subconscious runs the show. We can try here and there to control it consciously, but over the long term, the conscious mind, given that it's weaker and only works over a short period of time, it tends to lose out. So ultimately, what our subconscious is programmed with, if you think about it from a computer point of view, or from a human point of view, what the subconscious has learned throughout our lives, that's going to dictate our habitual thoughts, emotional reactions, behavioral, habits, and that will affect everything from health, relationships, finances, career, you name it, coming from self-image all the way up to how we express ourselves in the world. So if the subconscious is not aligned with what we want consciously for ourselves, meaning our goals, then we're going to have internal conflict, elevated stress, and we're going to get frustrated whenever we try to achieve what we're trying to achieve.
So one of the things that I think about is there's this relationship between our irrational and emotional decision making, and when it comes to the subconscious, and for so many of us, we don't even understand where or why it comes from or why it does what it does. We're just kind of like moving about the world. When I was younger, I'm a perfect case scenario of this, right? Especially on the backside of a lot of childhood trauma.
Yeah.
And when I'm 25, I'm just constantly in the throes of self-sabotage, emotional, irrational decisions. I'm 350 pounds, smoking 2 packs a day, drinking myself to sleep, getting in fights, like as a grown man, getting in fights. I'm $50,000 in debt. Car gets repoed. Many of these things I've talked about on the show before. But I'm in this place where I cannot, for the life of me, Todd, figure out why the hell bad things keep happening to me, right?
Yeah.
And so as we're in this, and knowing that this thing that you just talked about, without alignment, you walk down this path of conflict. Dude, my 20s was that in a nutshell. And it wasn't actually until I started moving towards really a lot of compassion, a lot of grace, discipline, a lot of the things that people tell us we should do, that shifted. But the biggest shifts in my life didn't really come until I started doing some of this inner work that required subconscious reprogramming.
Yeah.
So talk us a little bit more through about the relationship of our subconscious and then our day-to-day actions, and why, even though we might have big goals, we'll get in our way, we'll self-sabotage, we'll do things we said we wouldn't do.
Okay, great. So I tend to, as a hypnotist, I tend to speak a lot in metaphors. I feel it's an easy way for people to understand things. So I'll give you a quick example and then answer it more literally. So imagine you have a horse and a person who wants to ride the horse. Now, if a horse were to just show up on in your field one day, you might say, "Wow, great! I have a horse, and I can, it can help me plow my field and do work for me. I can let my daughter play with it, and she can have a horsey ride. I can show it off to my friends, and it can be a pet." Now that sounds great, but you don't know where this horse came from. You don't know what it went through before you met it. And so if you try to hop on the horse, it might throw you off. If you try to feed it, it might bite you. It might break the barn door. It might, cause a lot of damage. And so the way I look at this is the horse represents our subconscious mind. It's very powerful and it can do great harm or amazing, wonderful things. And the person who wants to ride the horse is our conscious mind. So this is another way of looking at it that's a little more dynamic than the iceberg. So if you want to ride this horse, you need to have some degree of control of the horse, but you need to have a good relationship with the horse. If the horse is wild, meaning it's never been trained properly, meaning it's undisciplined, right? Or even worse, it's been traumatized, mistreated, beaten, starved, whatever it might be, and that horse is very troubled emotionally or physically or both, then good luck trying to control it. You can have the reins, you can have the bit, you can have all of that. And if you try to steer it one way, if it doesn't want to follow your direction, it sure as hell is not going to go where you want it to go. And a lot of the time when we try to control ourselves through willpower, or try to stand there and reason with the horse when it doesn't speak English, we're not going to get results. We're just going to get frustration. So I mentioned if the horse has been traumatized or undisciplined. So the key is, in order to tame this horse, it needs to be rehabilitated. It also needs to be cared for, and it needs to be disciplined in a healthy way, not beating it up, but encouraging it, correcting it, and such is how we ideally would raise our kids. And since most of us were raised by people who were physically able to have children, but were emotionally, a lot of them, children still, they were dealing with their own emotional problems. And just because they could reproduce doesn't mean, as you know from your experience, just because your parents could have you doesn't mean they were ready. And so they take out their unresolved issues on us, not because they're evil, but because they can't help it. Because the subconscious, when it's upset, when it's misaligned, when it is troubled, especially with unresolved trauma, which is our specialty to resolve that, there is this very intense energy within that needs to come out. And that's where this emotional pain or suffering develops from unresolved trauma, and it manifests as anxiety or depression or addiction or suicide attempts, and even things that are less significant, even mild phobias or panic attacks. Whatever it is, most people's emotional and behavioral problems, Michael, they really stem from unresolved trauma, whether it's a big T trauma or the relatively minor traumas that most of us have experienced, especially when we were children.
Yeah, and I think so much of it is being dysregulated.
Yeah.
Right. If you look at the reality of the space and time that we live in, between online content, social media, the consummate draw to be distracted, people have failed to recognize the present moment. And I think that that's a big reason why they fall into this trapping of the next thing, the next thing, the next thing, right? That dopamine hit, which, ultimately is what our conscious and our subconscious is seeking, because it feels good. But when it feels good for 3 seconds at a time, we would call that being a drug addict, right? And you're always chasing your next high. I've had the benefit of interviewing some really amazing people like Dr. Anna Lamke, who wrote Dopamine Nation, on the show a few years ago. And we had a very similar conversation where it's like, we're chasing this hit. Because if you think about this, right, I have this idea in my head that a big part of this journey for us as the individual is reparenting.
Yeah, totally.
If a parent would have taken care of you the way you were supposed to, nurtured you, loved you, spoke into you, showed you it's okay to fail, not belittle you, not put you down, not do so many of the physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, sexual abuse, all of those things, what you actually would have gotten were little dopamine hits. And your little subconscious brain would have been like, oh, it's nice. It feels good to be touched by a human, not the phobia of if somebody touches me, I'm going to have a panic attack, right? And so with us being so unbelievably dysregulated, I mean, are you finding it that sitting with people in hypnotherapy and hypnosis is actually harder to get to the subconscious than maybe it used to be?
I don't think so. I mean, I've been practicing since 2007, and since 2020, I've seen all clients by Zoom only. And I haven't noticed any drop in effectiveness, either due to that way of working with people or due to the change in the elevated stress level that I think, for the most part, we've all been experiencing for 5 years. So I don't know if it's harder. I think in some ways maybe it's harder, but in some ways it's easier. That's kind of a wishy-washy answer. But I think when people are in touch with their suffering, which varies from person to person, and some people, we've had clients who are so overwhelmed that they with how their life is, for whatever reason, that they don't know if they can continue living like that. And then there are other people who are just, bothered and inconvenienced by certain things. So it runs the full spectrum. But I think the more pain someone's in, the greater the potential that they want to do something about it. If someone, I wrote a book about quitting smoking in 2019, and one of the controversial things I said in there, and this was based on my experience working with, at that point, hundreds and hundreds of people to help them quit smoking, is that someone who smokes a pack a day of cigarettes potentially could find it easier to quit than the person who smokes 2 or 3 cigarettes a day. And the reason has nothing to do with nicotine. It has everything to do with the amount of emotional suffering they experience being controlled by something like that, the amount of physical discomfort they might feel due to the effects on the body and all of that. So because the person really is more likely to be suffering, they're more motivated to do something about it, to seek help, to be relentless in the pursuit of resolving it, and not to just be like the dog laying on a nail where it's uncomfortable, but it's not so uncomfortable that it needs to get up and move, because it kind of likes laying down. So, I think the issue with, to kind of go back to what you were saying before, if we were, look, unfortunately, I think it's an inevitability. It might be a little Pollyanna-ish to assume that someday we could be all so well adjusted that we raise our kids perfectly. I don't know if that's in the cards. I think what is realistic is that despite the bumps and the bruises that people get growing up, childhood, adolescence, and so on, where I've found most traumas, even little ones, like, the adverse childhood experiences that you're familiar with, those studies and everything, I'm sure, the little things that may not be a horrific trauma, but they can cumulatively affect someone in a negative way, and how their sense of self develops and how they relate to the world. So, childhood could probably be defined as the period during which you get screwed up, and then it's up to you, if you choose to accept the responsibility as an adult with self-awareness and perseverance, to get unscrewed up. So, if you drive a car for long enough, it's going to get scratches. It doesn't matter how well you protect it. If you use it, it's going to get dents and bird crap and other things on it. The key is not how do you protect it from ever happening. There are things we can do to help it in society, but ultimately people are going to get traumatized. What I've found, which is inspiring to me consistently, is that pretty much no matter what kind of trauma it is, how long it's been since it happened, how big it is, the mind, the brain, however you want to look at it, can unlearn the trauma, can de-energize the traumatic memories, which are filled with a lot of strong negative emotional reaction. That can be neutralized, usually very quickly. And then someone who had learned that they're not worthy of love or that the world is unsafe based on the evidence of their experiences, once those memories change, then the anchor holding those limiting or disempowering beliefs in place has been released. Then that's where a lot of the hypnosis comes in to change the beliefs. So, hypnotists do not, at least my kind of hypnotist, my wife and I were both board certified hypnotists, so we both work together, different clients, but the same material, same stuff. We don't make people cluck like a chicken. We help people relearn things. We help people change how they think, because how you think will dictate how you feel, and that will dictate how you act. And if you don't change, if you have an unhealthy way of thinking, which was learned in most cases, then you're going to have unhealthy ways of feeling, which is why there are so many people on antidepressants and anti-anxiety meds. And that's going to lead to unhealthy ways of acting, which is why, 70% of the country is overweight, 15% smoke or vape nicotine. Who knows what percentage are hooked on marijuana or alcohol or social media. So you probably have 95% of the population that is struggling with some form of addiction or emotionally compulsive behavior, and just trying to control it without dealing with the root issue, which is how the person's thinking, is not going to work. So it really, all, as far as I'm concerned, Michael, it really all comes down to the subconscious. And so if you know how to communicate with it in a way that it will actually be agreeable to change, then you can create a mental handshake between your conscious and subconscious, and that creates a congruency, which allows people to move forward much more easily and naturally than they would if they're fighting themselves.
Yeah. I do want to talk about how we do that, but I want to stay in something that I think is actually provocative and really needs to be spoken about right now. And that is that we see many people, and I've coached thousands and thousands of people over almost a decade, and I've seen it in every single one. I saw it in myself. I'm sure you see it in yourself and many of your clients. They come to me and they're like, I have this addiction to this thing. And then on the backside of it, they go, well, I'm just have an addictive personality. And then I go, wait a second, you're telling me you're addicted to chaos. How does being addicted to chaos serve you? How does that make your life better? Right. And so we have these addictive personalities that lead down this path of the thoughts, feelings, and then the actions that then create this life. And it's like, okay, we can rationalize, like smoking the cigarette is bad. We can rationalize, I'm not going to eat, or I can rationalize I'm going to McDonald's because it's there and it's convenient. I can rationalize cheating on my wife or husband. We can rationalize all of it. But it's not actually until we unlearn the traumas and the behaviors that anything shifts. One of the things that I've saw in myself, which now I'm heading to 40. I've been doing this work for 14, 15 years. I mean, constantly in the journey of the healing. And another thing just comes up and comes up and comes up and comes up. And I've just kind of like relegated myself to the notion that that is reality. That every new, as TD Jakes said, new levels, new devils. And so you start leveling up, you start shifting, and then boom, the next thing presents itself. But we're talking about this idea about the unlearning, right? And especially compulsive behavior, because I would have to assume that's generally the thing most people are coming to you for. I mean, I don't know, but I'm curious, right? Because it's like, I know I'm doing this thing that is completely ruining my life, but I can't stop. Again, addicted to the chaos. So how in the world, not only do we unlearn, but how do we then take those unlearnings and those knowledge and all the information that we're getting and distill that down into something that actually helps us change our life? Because one of the things is I think a lot of people get stuck in knowledge and they do nothing with information.
Right. Okay. So let me unpack that. There was a lot there. First of all, I don't buy the addictive personality concept. I think that's an easy thing for people to say, and it's person smokes, drinks, gambles, whatever. Oh, addictive personality. I don't believe it's a personality type at all. I think it's simply a measure of how much discomfort the person's in emotionally and how much they have to do to alleviate that discomfort temporarily. So the person who can get away with smoking 3 or 4 cigarettes a day, and that may be their only, quote, vice, maybe they're not as overwhelmed as the person who smokes 2 packs a day and has to drink a 6-pack of beer every night to wind down. Very clearly, in most cases, the person who thinks they have an addictive personality and has multiple compulsive habits that they have trouble controlling naturally, those people tend to be either unfulfilled or very emotionally dysregulated or emotionally distressed for any number of reasons. It can come from unresolved trauma, not always. It can come just from feeling overwhelmed with the events in their life. But whatever the case is, Michael, like if someone has multiple compulsive tendencies or addictive tendencies, I tend to use the word more compulsion than addiction. There's fine differences between them, but I think it has less baggage than using the word addiction. If someone is emotionally dependent on some behavior or substance to temporarily make them feel better, then they're going to keep doing it until they resolve the reason why they're not feeling good to begin with. So one of the things I often say is, if you didn't feel so low, you wouldn't have to get so high. Mm-hmm. So addiction and compulsive habits, even if it's just overeating or eating, junk food or cookies or whatever it might be, if the person has seemingly no self-control, what I think is really helpful as a first step is to say, what is my subconscious trying to do for me that is a favor? Because we can think of the subconscious as the devil on one shoulder and the conscious mind is the angel on the other shoulder, and they're whispering in each ear telling us what to do, and they're battling it out. The problem is the subconscious is not the devil. It's not trying to hurt us. It's actually, what I find though, Michael, is most issues that I see fall into 1 or 2 categories. The subconscious represented by, that part of you that is sabotaging, like you mentioned, self-sabotage. It's either like a misguided friend saying, here, have a cigarette. Here, have your 5th or 6th drink. Go cheat on your spouse. So it's trying to help you feel good because, weirdly and ironically, based on its own beliefs, it created the shitty feeling that it's now trying to help you get out of. So it creates the emotional distress, and then it offers up a behavioral solution to help you feel better temporarily. Now, if it really fixed anything, there would be no addictions because you would do it once and problem solved. So the misguided friend, like if you're on a diet and your friend imagines that you must be suffering eating kale and how awful, and and it will say, come on, just have one cookie, it's just one, it's not going to kill you. They're not trying to sabotage you, presumably. They're trying to help you feel better because they think you must be suffering. So that's the misguided friend, and that explains, a lot of these behaviors. The other is the overprotective parent. Now, if you had a parent who was not at all overprotective, you may not relate to that. But in general, we can think of the mother who says, oh my gosh, don't go outside after dark. The world is a scary place. Make sure you wear your mittens or you will freeze, all these. And so what they do is they implant a lot of fearful thinking, but they're not trying to mess us up and have us end up on at a therapist for years. They're just trying to protect us. So the subconscious creates fear, phobia, panic, anxiety, stress, as a way of helping us avoid or escape from a perceived threat, even if it's not rational, even if it's not real. Case in point, fear of flying. Safer than driving, but, there are people who will not get on an airplane because their subconscious says, this is the one plane that's going to crash. And so they avoid getting on or they escape at the last moment before the door closes. So that's a very sensible response if the perception or belief is correct. But it's not. And so there's most of our problems come from misunderstandings and mislearning at the subconscious level.
Let's walk it a little bit more, because when I think about compulsive behaviors, right, which I think is a great way to phrase it in correlation or against addiction, right?
Yeah.
I think compulsivity is something that you don't. I don't recall ever doing anything compulsive and being aware of doing it, right? But no matter what it was binge drinking, or it was like the hookup, or it was like the pack a day, or it was like the anything. And then today, like sometimes I have these compulsive behaviors that I have to catch myself then. It's like, why did I have to go to the gym again today? I could have rested. Why did I have 9 coffees today? Which that's my number one vice, right? So I'm like, okay, wait a second, where does this sit? Where do these behaviors keep coming up? And so when you talk about this idea about like there's this correlation to being unfulfilled, what I want to discover here is like, well, if that's the problem, then why aren't people just doing things that make them fulfilled? And then wouldn't that then eliminate compulsive behavior? And wouldn't that then unlearn the trauma? And then wouldn't that get rid of addictive personalities and tendencies? So how do you get fulfilled then?
That's one cause of someone's emotional discomfort. I wouldn't say that's the primary one. I think trauma, big T, and especially little t, which are much more common, and by the way, that makes up the vast majority of the clients that my wife Gina and I see. It's not compulsive behaviors, although that is a symptom of an emotional disturbance. So people typically have persistent emotional disturbances. They may or they may not act out in an unhealthy behavioral way. Or if they do, they wouldn't see it as a compulsion because they don't drink alcohol, they don't smoke, they don't overeat. Maybe they don't overexercise, but they might work too hard. They might think they love their work, talking about fulfillment, but really they are working like workaholic kind of behavior, type A personality behavior, and they're putting way too much pressure on themselves, even at the expense of relationships or health, because they feel like if they slow down or if they don't achieve X, Y, or Z, then they're not going to be good enough, or they're going to think that they're a failure, or they're less than, or they're not living up to someone's ideal, including theirs or their parents. And this affects CEOs, entrepreneurs, high-performing athletes. Most of our clients are normal, everyday people, but occasionally we get the high-end performance kind of person who's a professional athlete or a CEO of a company with thousands of people, and they have the same issues that everyone else does. It's just they push themselves harder very often because they're compensating for something inside that they perceive as missing. They may not even be aware of it, like you mentioned. They might be compulsively engaging in some behavior. They may not have the self-awareness. I mean, most people don't, through no fault of their own. No one teaches us this stuff, but it's the most important thing for people to understand, because if you don't know what goes on between your ears, then how the hell are you ever going to live the life that would truly inspire you? So how do people get fulfilled? Well, one is, realistically, not everyone can have a job or a career that's fulfilling to them. I mean, I'm sure there could be some people who make minimum wage who are truly fulfilled by what they do, but let's assume for a moment they're rare. It may not be practical for them if they love being an artist, if they love, throwing pottery. If the person has to put food on the table and they are at the poverty line, you can't realistically say, well, just follow your bliss, do what you love, and the money will follow. That's, in the universe I live in, Michael, that's just fairy tale speak. That's not realistic. So it's unrealistic for people to expect that they can do that, but they can add a few hours to their week where they're doing something that inspires them, that fulfills them. It could be usually a hobby, or listening to a certain type of music, or whatever it might be, having good conversations like we're having now. To me, I find that very fulfilling. So even though I love my work most of the time, even if I didn't, if I have a few hours in the week where I'm doing something that I enjoy, like personally, I love gardening, I love playing with my dog, I love taking a walk with my wife, and having these kind of conversations, that might be enough. So someone doesn't have to, not everyone is going to be able to spend 40 hours a week doing what they love. But if they give themselves the opportunity to spend a few hours a week doing something that lights them up, that gives them energy, that they love to talk about, that they will do without anyone reminding them to do it, that can really make up for a lot of the soul draining that happens during the rest of the week.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to throw that as a reality check there.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I mean, because on paper, you look at my life and you go, this guy must do what he loves. Huge podcast, travels the world, billboards in Times Square, written 4 books, coaches all these people. And I came to realize, I mean, it must have been, 4 months ago? I was like, I don't have a hobby. I have nothing fun at all in my life. And it was really like a aha kind of moment for me, because I realized that all of the creativity that I'd been leveraging over really my whole life has gone away in the last few years. I got zeroed in, started working really hard, changed what I was doing, and then I was like, oh, maybe this is why I got burned out. But like you mentioned, like I couldn't see that because I didn't know, right? I didn't know that there's fulfillment in going to the concert, going to the walk, hanging out with friends and watching the game, doing many of the things that I kind of threw out of my life for the sake of like career and drive.
Right.
And so I think that's a really good point. I think doing inventory in your life, like that can play a big role. And I think that one of the things that has happened is, and I think this is for me, there's always been just this ebb and flow. So as somebody that knows A scores, I have a 10. So like I'm like the Kobe of this shit, right? And it's really hard. A lot of days are really, really, really difficult, Todd. And the thing that it takes me doing to just kind of make it through the day to day is I'm like, I have to follow the routine. I've got to do the meditation, the journaling, the yoga, the working out, the not eating processed foods, like all these things that for many people, it's 1 or 2. For me, it's like literally all of them or I can't fucking function.
Sure.
It's wild, right? But one of the things that has happened for me, because I've done hypnosis and hypnotherapy, I think probably 7 or 8 times now. And this thing started happening to me, which I know you talk about that I don't think is talked about enough. And that's these notions about memory reconsolidation, right? This idea of loosening the trauma's grip on our natural brain process. And I think what has started happening for me over the last 5-6 months was like, oh, wait a second, I can have fun. And here's the crazy part. It was I can have fun actually for the first time. And so like I'm sitting in that and like, again, this reconsolidation of all these memories, and every single time that I had fun as a kid and there was some kind of ramification, I've been able to kind of like put that to the side. Now, there's still work to do. I know there's always more work to do.
Sure.
But I really want to dive into this because I don't think it's talked about enough. I don't think people understand it. And I think that if they do, it's more practical than I think people will understand.
Yeah, so you want me just to define it as I understand it and how?
Yeah,
how
absolutely. I want to go into it. Yeah.
Okay, so as you would imagine, I'll start with an analogy or a metaphor. Now, many of us played a game called telephone when we were kids, or were familiar with it. You have a bunch of kids sitting in a circle, and one starts with a message, like a sentence, and whispers it in the ear to the person next to them. And then the next one whispers it into the ear of the person next to them. And by the time it gets around a minute later to the original person, it's been spoken 10, 15 times, usually the message has changed. Not intentionally, it just changes because little details get lost or are heard differently. So the way our memories work is kind of similar to that game. Each time we access a memory, and let's just for simplicity purposes call it consciously accessing it. Like, let me tell you about a time when I was so-and-so age with so-and-so wherever I was. And I'm going to tell you about that experience. What I'm actually recalling is not the original imprint. It's the last time I recalled it. So each time you recall a memory, what you're doing is you're accessing the circuitry in your brain. It becomes malleable. So think about it like a ball of clay. It actually becomes soft and malleable. Now, most of the time when we talk about a memory, or an experience we had, it's the differences from one time to the next are very subtle. And so we usually don't notice that there could be a mild drift over time. And it's usually not important. But every time we remember it, we're remembering the latest version, like software, the last time we saved it. So we think of it this way: you pull that clay ball out of your head. That's the memory, okay? And then it's now soft. So you don't have to change it, but you could. And then if you do change it, and then it goes back into your head, when you goes back into long-term storage in your memory, it solidifies usually in the span of minutes or hours, and that becomes the new state that you remember. Now, the reason why this is important, does that make sense so far?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep. Following.
The reason why this is important is that when people who have experienced traumatic events, and again, doesn't have to be a horrifically large T, big T trauma, it could just be any emotionally upsetting experience that we have not properly addressed, which most people haven't through no fault of their own. So we all have, almost all of us have experienced some trauma in our life, generally when we were children or adolescents. And when we talk about it, especially if we repeat the same story again and again, all we're really doing is reinforcing that story. In a way, we're strengthening the circuitry in our brain because we're giving it more life. We're giving it more legitimacy by telling the same story again and again. This is one of the problems with identifying with your problem, as opposed to seeing that as a tendency or behavior or something you learn. Like the person who struggles with alcohol saying, I am an alcoholic. Will you show me someone who says, I am an alcoholic, and they can't, incant that to themselves again and again, and I'm going to tell you they stand a much higher likelihood of relapsing than the person who says, I am a person who, for whatever reason, tends to choose to use alcohol to make myself feel better. Because one is the identity, which predicts behavior, and the other is just behavior, which you can change. So identity is important. And if we have a traumatic experience and we identify with that trauma, and that becomes our persona, that becomes how we think of ourselves, then that can become like a foundational operating system in our mental computer, and it can run so much of what we do unintentionally. So what memory reconsolidation does, and that's a big part of the work that Gina and I do to resolve trauma, usually very quickly, at least the memories, is we have our client access that memory without needing to give us the story. So most of the time, we have very little information about what their experience was, because not because we don't care, just because it's unnecessary and it just eats up a lot of time, and there's no point reinforcing it for the 100th time. So we don't need to know much at all, but they think about it. They're probably feeling emotional discomfort. It might affect them for a minute or so. They might feel their heart rate increasing if it was a very upsetting experience. And then we go through a variety of different techniques and different methods that are innovative and a lot of the time improvised. And it changes how they think about that experience, but not at a conscious level, because that doesn't matter. It changes how their subconscious represents it, how they see it in their mind, the dialogue that is the soundtrack or is the audio track to that experience, the emotional tone that they experience while they're recalling that memory. All of that can change in minutes, and we use a variety of tools to do that. And what happens, though, Michael, which is remarkable, and it never gets old, quite honestly, is that for most people, they can go from being really agitated or upset or angry or sad or scared, whatever it is, recalling it, which they've done 100 times on their own, to either feeling neutral about it or maybe minimally bothered, going from like a 7 or an 8 out of 10 down to like a 1, or sometimes laughing. And the really cool part is, once we're done doing that, and like I said, that can often be minutes, 3 minutes, 20 minutes. When it's done, that becomes the new way that their subconscious stores that memory. And importantly, they don't suddenly say, oh, nothing ever happened to me in the past. So it's not like the neuralizer from Men in Black. It doesn't erase their mind. What it does, they still have the full knowledge of what happened. They can still say, oh, yeah, sure, I was attacked, I was held up at gunpoint, and the guy, had the gun to my head and stole my purse. But now they can talk about it and feel little or nothing as they talk about it. Whereas before, they might not have even been able to think about it without getting really nervous and panicked. But when they think about it, it doesn't bother them, but they still know what happened. So in a nutshell, that's what memory reconsolidation could do. And I do want to say this other thing, is that is a natural state, that's a natural process in the brain. It happens anyway, like the game of telephone. But if it's going to happen naturally, why not intentionally guide the change in that memory instead of just saying, well, let's talk about it 100 times.
Right.
So that's hugely important. And in the work we do, it's maybe the most fun part for our clients as well. When most people would think trauma work is horrible and difficult and painful. And usually it's painful for a minute or two. And then it's actually kind of fun, weirdly.
Yeah, I mean, this is a big reason why this is just my own personal thing. I've always said I wish that I would have gotten a coach or a hypnotherapist before a regular therapist in this journey, because I just, there's behavioral changes that are associated with those memories that I know that when I shifted those, my life changed. Like, it was crazy. I mean, I can almost track it like a watch. Like, I could look at some of these experiences, whether it was CBT or EMDR, and while those were very powerful, honestly, for me, it was hypnosis and then having a coach that carried the most weight, because I felt like if I could control my behaviors, I could change my life. What I didn't know 15 years ago, which I know now, obviously, is what it actually is. It's controlling your mind. It's controlling your emotions that then in turn impact and control your behaviors that then in turn change your life. So somebody's listening, they're deep in this conversation. They're like, okay, I could see the benefit of what Todd's talking about, but what's actually happening? Like, how do I actually change my mind? Like, how do I actually change my identity, my beliefs? How do I, change and resolve these emotional and behavioral issues? Like, what is happening when I sit down with somebody like you, Todd?
Well, what's happening is that, well, first of all, hypnosis is a part of what we do. Most of the memory related work and other things that we do are, in the realm of NLP or neurolinguistic programming, which basically puts a turbo boost on hypnosis. So hypnosis is great, but in and of itself, by itself, it would not be nearly as powerful as combining it with these other modalities. So, but all of them are based on having a more receptive state of mind. So and I don't mean consciously like, okay, I'll unfold my arms, I'll listen to what you have to say, I'm receptive. Again, that's at a conscious level. We're interested in how can we help this person access a natural state. Hypnosis is a natural state. Everyone experiences it daily. Daydreaming, playing video games, and responding emotionally to what you're playing or reading a novel or watching a movie and emotionally responding, even zoning out when driving. Those are all hypnotic states. So everyone experiences hypnosis constantly. It just happens automatically. What we do is we help through a variety of different techniques, help our clients access that state however we're doing it, whether they're closing their eyes and breathing deeply and zoning out in what we would think of as a hypnosis session, or, looking eye to eye like we are right now, we're just talking about stuff, or you might imagine something. Whatever the case is, it's simply about helping someone get into a speed learning state where they can unlearn, relearn, learn something new, and that updates the software in the mental computer. So, I mean, I think that answers your question on some level. I'm not going to get into kind of take a stab at a neuroscience explanation, but there are certain things that happen in the brain where our imagination is more augmented, more empowered, and the critical part of us that tends to reject things gets less blood flow or less activity, and that allows us to think about possibilities using our imagination through storytelling or what if. So we don't have to believe something that, oh, I no longer have interest in junk food. Oh, I'm over my trauma. They don't have to believe that. But what if that were true? How would you feel? What would your day-to-day be like? So you can imagine what it would be like to overcome that problem. And as that happens, a person is now open. They're receptive, not to having their mind controlled, which is a common myth of hypnosis, which is complete nonsense, but to being basically dehypnotized. Because really what we do is we dehypnotize people. People have already been hypnotized by society's bullshit or by whatever their parents told them that is hobbling them in their life today, or whatever experiences they've had. They've already been imprinted and programmed. We simply help them use their natural abilities because they don't have the guidance, but we guide them to unlearn it, to shift. And kind of like hypnosis, as we do it, is kind of like a dance. You have a lead and you have a person who follows. The person just needs to be able to follow directions. The lead has to know all the steps. And as long as the two want to work together and dance, you can have magic. But as soon as one person says, okay, I don't like this, I don't want to do it, the dance is over. That's kind of what it's like working with a hypnotist. So basically it's creating an open mind that will allow a person's subconscious to think about things the way their conscious mind wants them to. Meaning, I'm a non-smoker. I can feel confident. I don't have to keep defining myself as, I need other people's approval in order to feel like an okay person. So really, most of the work, Michael, is just unlearning stuff.
Yeah, dehypnotizing is a great way to phrase it. Whenever I have people come into my programs, I always tell them that I'm going to brainwash them, but only because their brain's dirty. And I think that's a big part of it is like looking at the reality. Like when you take the willingness to walk this path and do this work, what comes on the backside can be very beautiful. And it's not that it's easy, because most of the time it's not. And it's not that it's like a one size fits all, because trust me, name a modality and I have tried it and most of it did nothing for me. Mm-hmm. And so it's about finding the right fit. And then ultimately, I think what it's really about is like not giving up. It is like the willingness to keep showing up, to keep doing the work, to know, again, as I mentioned, 15 years into this, just myself and more money than I care to even mention, just trying to be this normal.
Sure.
The next thing is coming. And that is just what I've discovered is the nature of life. Todd, this has been an amazing conversation, man. I really, really appreciate it. Before I ask you my last question, where can everyone find you, learn more about you, and come and work with you?
Yes. So thank you, Michael. So like I mentioned, we see all clients by Zoom. So time zone permitting, no matter where someone lives, we can potentially help them one-on-one if they're struggling with, unwanted thoughts and feelings and behaviors or trauma. If you're listening to this and you're wondering, hey, could this help me? Is this the kind of thing that could really make a difference? We did create a 1-minute survey on our website, and it is literally like 60 seconds to do it. If you go to goodwinhypnosis.com/survey and just take 1 minute to answer, I think 8 or 10 little bullet point questions, that will indicate whether, based on your answers, we think we might be a good fit for you and you might be a good fit for what we do. Make sure you'll have an opportunity to put in your email address, and make sure you mention Think Unbroken, because you'll immediately get 2 free gifts that we're offering. One is a deeply relaxing self-hypnosis audio called Go With The Flow, and it's really great for gaining perspective and reducing emotional reactivity. And it's just really good for, practicing that relaxation response to lower stress. And the other is an educational video called 17 Facts You Need to Know About Yourself Before Seeing a Hypnotist or Therapist. And that covers a lot of different topics that most people don't know much about, including some of the things we talked about today. So you'll get those immediately. And then we'll also, we occasionally have free live Q&A where we teach a concept or two and then take live questions from whoever's attending. So we do this by Zoom. So when you submit your email and you get those 2 free gifts, we'll also let you know when our next one is, and then you're welcome to register and come to that. So, there's no pressure in any of this. It's just kind of a free and easy way to get started and to see if it helps you. So it's just goodwinhypnosis.com/survey, and reach out to us, and maybe we'll be able to help.
Perfect. Yeah. And guys, of course, go to thinkunbrokenpodcast.com for that and more in the show notes. My last question for you, my friend, what does it mean to you to be unbroken?
So I would say that, like I mentioned, few people reach adulthood without some dings and dents and scratches, bumps and bruises. That's part of life. Some people more than others. So I think being unbroken is to be resilient. And despite whatever dings and dents we got, it's our responsibility, if we choose to accept that, to adapt, to heal, to learn, and to grow from that experience so that we can hopefully take it from being baggage to actually turn it into fuel to inspire us and frame it in a way that we can actually build on what we would have thought of as trauma, but actually look at something that can really help us turbocharge our life in the direction of fulfillment and wellness.
Yeah, beautifully said, man. And I want to encourage everyone to walk that path, because while it can be very difficult, it's also incredibly rewarding. Todd, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure to spit with you today. Unbroken Nation, guys, thank you so much for listening. If you got any value out of today's episode, you think it will help someone in your life, share it with them. Follow us on Instagram at MichaelUnbroken. Take care of yourselves, take care of each other. And until next time, my friends, be unbroken. I'll see ya.